Pete, Harry and Meghan's charity has seen a drop-off of almost 10 million in donations. Is it true or is it false?
Is this one of these "is that it" kind of questions? I've been doing this show quite some time now.
They probably lost the cheque in the post.
Oh, God, yes. Well, apparently the Archwell Foundation, which is the name of the foundation that they've got, is no longer delinquent. It's all been cleared up. They found the cheque in the mail.
So just to be clear, what happened with the delinquency?
So basically, they had to kind of like renew their kind of foundational basis for a status. That's the word I'm looking for, thank you. And the cheque got lost in the post, which is very much the dog ate my homework. However, they did kind of release the tracking details of the post, and it wasn't really Harry and Meghan's fault or the foundation's fault. But
nothing ever is.
No, I know, yeah, that's true. But quite interesting.
Well, as I say, they'll have to sack some staff over this, because there are members of staff who've worked for Harry and Meghan for over 3 weeks.
Well,
so, I mean, which is a real record.
I mean, like, if you could last 3 weeks with that, like, you deserve a knighthood, I suppose.
Who was the biggest delinquent?
Yeah, but it's interesting you say that, because I didn't realise there's only 5 people work for this foundation. And the head of it is James Holt, who's Prince Harry's kind of right-hand man, what they used to call a body man. And it's interesting that his starting salary was about 49k. After he joined the foundation, he's now on £181,000 a year. And he gave himself a 15k bonus, despite the fact they've had this massive drop in donations. Now, talk about, feeding yourself your own money.
Now, Conor, if you had to decide the level of pay that you were going to give to somebody to hang around with Harry and Meghan, surely you'd approve for 181,000 plus a bonus.
Listen, one of my roles is to help promote British exports.
Yep.
And that's one that we're...
Look, you spent a lot of time with Margaret Thatcher, and obviously she was a great British woman. What would she have thought of Meghan Markle and indeed Prince Harry?
I certainly don't think they got the traction they thought they were going to get in the US. And having just spent 2 weeks in 7 states in 11 days, I don't think their names were mentioned once.
I agree with that. I work for a US-listed company. I'm in the States a fair bit. And my impression is that they view Meghan as an extension of the show business they've thought the royalty to be. America has some die-hard royalist fans, right? And those people understand that the monarchy undertakes quite a lot of public service that the rest of America doesn't get. But the rest of America just thinks Meghan's part of the show business, and it's neither here nor there. I'll have a go at your Thatcher question.
Okay.
Because I think that when I think of Margaret Thatcher, I think of an important sense of duty.
Yes.
I think that's the thing that runs through her life. I think she would look at this situation and askance because Prince Harry wanted to be in the United States but still have the title, not do the work but still have the protection, security, imprimatur, gongs and all of that. And that's where I think you might have seen the famous Thatcher
He sort of almost adopted an old Tory slogan about Europe. He wanted to be in the family but not run by the family.
But it's amazing, isn't it, when you look at somebody like Margaret Thatcher and that great sense of duty, also the great sense of being frugal as well. She was very much a child of that generation, that post-war generation. And then you look at the way that nowadays there's so many people who are just interested in a me culture, which I think Meghan embodies. Has Harry and Meghan's charity seen a drop of almost 10 million in donations? Is it true or is it false?
I think it's true.
It's absolutely true. OK, on to Conor. The Mayor of New York has said migrants should fill lifeguard vacancies because they are excellent swimmers. Is it true or is it false? This sounds like a crass insult, doesn't it?
So every fibre of my being wants to say that it's false. I have a horrible feeling that it's actually true.
I mean, look, the migrant crisis is a problem both in the United States of America and here. What can be done to deal with it?
So there are similarities, by the way, about what's going on in the US at the Texas border, which I was talking to the governor of Texas about in a recent visit. It's organised gangs, some Russian, some Chinese, who are bringing people up through South America to the American border. They're not entirely sure how many are in, where they've come from, they're getting rid of the documents and so on. I said slightly facetiously a couple of weeks ago to some group I was talking to, if you stood on the beach of Dover and you saw these dinghies coming in and you shouted, "Women and children first," you would not be knocked over in the stampede.
That's absolutely right.
Nor are there a lot of people coming off those boats with walking sticks and Zimmer frames. Yep. These are young men who are overwhelmingly economic migrants.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to ask ourselves a question, in a way I suppose it's a compliment. Why do they want to pass through so many other safe countries before they come to us? I get the disincentive for the French to sort this out, because we send them back. It's their problem. They leave them to us. It's our problem. But I think it's really important not to underestimate the anger that there is with the public. You know, in my own constituency, which, you know, big tourist town, massive tourist economy, we until recently had 5 hotels adjacent to the town centre in Bournemouth full of economic migrants, and the resentment that builds
were
up.
technically asylum seekers or refugees.
Technically, yeah. Sorry, that's the lawyer in Alex.
But Alex, right across the Western world, people are feeling that their communities are starting to change. And I get frustrated at the way that if you're not in favour of uncontrolled immigration, you get accused of being racist. I mean, I don't think it's unreasonable for somebody to say our community can only take X number of people.
Not only is that not unreasonable, but it's actually not true to say that there are people in favour of completely uncontrolled migration either. Angela Merkel was the last person to test that proposition. She said there is no limit to the number of people that can come to Germany. And it turned out there was a limit. That limit was 1.5 million, and it substantially undermined both her and her...
It's Angela Merkel. She said that she's delighted with her immigration policy and it massively enhanced her political career. In fact, she's encouraging you, Alex, to commit in Finchley and Golders Green to 1.5 million migrants from France.
How encouraging. But it, of course, undermines the... So Conor's been in Parliament, in a government that's been in power for 14 years. I aspire to be in Parliament. And it's very difficult to convey your other messages about success on other areas when someone says, yeah, that's all well and good, but every hotel in my borough is housing asylum seekers or refugees who I believe are in fact economic migrants. Don't blame someone for wanting to come here, but let's call them what they are and treat them as such. The one thing I would say that is out with their control, and not the fault of someone who may come even with the most bogus claim in the world, is the length of time we take to process.
Right.
Yes.
If someone's got a bogus claim, it should be turned around and sent back before that person's feet even touch the ground. But instead, they're here for month after month after month, and that part isn't their fault.
But Pete, what they're going to do in the United States of America and the UK is bring in as many amnesties as possible. I'm convinced if the Conservatives lose the next election, then Keir Starmer will immediately just say, let's have an amnesty for everyone who's here. When Blair did this, it opened up the floodgates.
I don't disagree with you at all. It's what I expect Keir Starmer to do, is to kind of draw the line and say, let's start from zero again. And I completely agree with what's been said, is that unless we process faster and unless we process, more importantly, better, I think this problem is going to kind of rattle on, because one thing that the Labour Party haven't really come out with is what they're going to do with people that are already here. When we looked at the Labour announcements just the other day, it was all about tackling the gangs. And that's great about stopping people coming into the UK. But what about the people that are already here? Like we hear about the hotels, we hear about the changing communities.
But hang on a second.
You've got to do something.
I don't think that's right. To be fair to the Labour Party, because I think it's their best policy, they want to beef up the number of enforcers who are checking who's already here. Because lo and behold, when someone's on the list meant to be, whose asylum status has failed or refugee claim has failed, and we say, right, they're going to be on a Rwanda flight, are they easy to find? No, in fact, they've disappeared into the grey economy in the UK. And Labour says they want to beef up the powers of enforcement officers to go and find those people. It's not a bad policy, and we should be fair about it.
I'm going to say, it's not necessarily a bad policy. I just don't really trust the Labour Party, and more importantly, I don't trust the civil service to actually enforce it properly. Because one thing that we don't talk about when we talk about the process is what that actually involves. And when I think it was a bit of it was kind of leaked to the press a couple of months ago about how the fact that if one of these claimants lies, that cannot be held against their claim. And they can make up basically anything they like. If they don't want to answer a question, they don't have to answer a question. We can't say that we've got a robust process when that is what is actually.
But Pete, I've got to warn you of one thing. You've got a Conservative MP here and a Conservative candidate. Your basic proposition, Keir is even worse than Rishi. We're going to struggle to get any public comment from these two about it, unless you want to, Alex.
I would say this, that at least this government is trying to reverse the flow. And I thought the Albania deal on returns was fantastic. We should have more of that. The Rwanda deal, in my view, is a good one. And indeed, I see that the European People's Party is talking about adopting it. The Austrians have said we pioneered the way on things with that policy. But we should never pretend that Rwanda is the magic wand that's going to fix it all. In fact, we've got to keep going with the grind of processing applications, rejecting or accepting them, and move on from that. Just one more thing, though. The media has been full of lefty organisations going over to Calais and places like that and saying, finding people smugglers and saying, well, what happens next? And the gangs are telling, they're disarmingly honest. The gangs say, this Rwanda policy is really hurting my business.
Yeah.
So, Conor, the Mayor of New York, has he said that migrants should fill lifeguard vacancies because they're excellent swimmers? Is it true or is it false?
Depressingly, I'm going to go with true.
It's absolutely true. OK, on to Alex. The real-life Martha from Baby Reindeer has been accused of stalking Keir Starmer too. I should say, the real life, allegedly, Martha. And the reason we're directing it at you is because you're a lawyer. So you're going to keep us...
I decline to answer that. I think that's, having looked at the media, I believe that to be the case. I believe it to be one of those unlikely sectoral or genre crossovers of our time. It's a bit like getting a character from the Marvel universe and then popping up in another comic. I think it's true.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? So she sat in this very room, and apparently we paid her £250, and she wanted to 1.5 million and is now very, very upset about it. I mean, clearly you can't give us legal advice, but I suspect given she signed a contract, we gave her the money, then really she is not going to get her 1.5 million.
Hang on. You signed a contract with her that said 250 quid.
Yes.
And she's demanding 1.5 mil from you.
Yes.
Well, good luck to her.
I mean, Conor, was it irresponsible to say this is a true story rather than based on a true story?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
By the way, which is your favourite Spice Girl?
Definitely not the B one.
Sporty. She's the only one that can really sing.
Who's the one I didn't meet in the lift at the conference?
You're going to have to narrow that down.
Oh, really? Well, you've also been accused. You accused.
I've been accused of multiple.
You've been accused of saying that. Well, not even accused. You did say that Boris Johnson had lost his job because he was ambushed with a cake. Now, Conor, of all the great things you've done in Parliament, of all the great departments you've worked in, is ambushed with a cake going to be your ultimate legacy politically?
So, I'm under no illusions about that. I'm a student of political history. My degree was in history. I collect political biography. If I warrant an obituary, I have no doubt, whatever else I achieve in political life, there are two things that I'm going to be remembered for. There is ambush by cake, and there is the only minister, as far as I am aware in British history, who has been sacked in a sex scandal that didn't involve any sex.
Hey, congratulations.
That's impressive.
I preferred the cake one. Yeah. I preferred your earlier work. But anyway, so Alex, is the real life Martha from Baby Reindeer been accused of stalking Keir Starmer? Is it true or is it false?
True.
It is absolutely true. OK, on to Pete. Olympic athletes from Team GB are selling topless photos of themselves on OnlyFans to pay the rent.
My Lord.
And what are the ladies doing?
God knows.
Pete, you don't have a major problem with topless photos.
No. I've lost a little bit of weight.
You've done a bit of weight loss. You've basically been showing off your body.
Yeah, a little bit. No, but I actually know this.
Sorry, I should just say for legal reasons, not on OnlyFans. On legitimate.
I actually know this to be true. It's true of the Olympic divers, and apparently it's true across a number of athletes across different countries now. I've actually had to turn to OnlyFans and other sources of income because of the amount of training that they do. They don't have time to have a normal job, apparently. Yeah. And I think it does kind of raise this conversation about how much do athletes actually get paid. You know, when you're training for the Olympics, that is your entire life for a very intense moment of it. And then, you know, often if you don't quite make it or, you know, if you get injured or whatever, then, you know, you're suddenly out on the land.
But Conor, I'm sure on your travels you've met people who've won Olympic medals, who've been quite senior sportsmen. Very, very few of these people will earn enough money to retire. I had a friend of mine who got a Commonwealth bronze medal for the hammer throwing and just returned to his normal job the following week.
No, that's absolutely true. And, you know, when you see those people who are winning the medals and so on, they are people who have worked so hard and are at the pinnacle. But below them are thousands of others who have aspired to do that. In the old days of the professional footballer, they were electricians and plumbers and farm labourers and so on. And so back in the cases of former footballers from even as recently as the 60s and 70s who ended up in penury relative to what.
It's true in rugby too. So there's a lot of a couple of clubs I've seen where they will, even with star players, refuse to let them play until they've lined up and signed off on their plan for a post-playing career plan. And I really admire that sense of responsibility that some clubs have.
Now, talking of being responsible, would you, in order to attract voters in Finchley and Golders Green, do topless photos?
What, you mean again?
I should just stress, though, that these are safe for work pictures. And it's, I think it's one's Tom Daly's old diving partner and one's called Noah Singh, if I remember rightly. But apparently it's, if I remember rightly, it did start off as a charity thing, but they are apparently raking in thousands of pounds over it.
Well, if the calendar girls can do it.
Well, this is the point. I don't really bemoan them. You know, if you've got the body to be able to do it, go on and do it.
If you've got the body to be able to do it, after I mentioned the calendar girls, right, well, whether you've got the body or not, Pete, makes absolutely no difference. Anyway, I want to move on from this because it's just going to end badly. Okay, so have two athletes from Team GB decided to go on OnlyFans? Is it true or is it false?
It's true.
It's absolutely true.
That Was the Woke That Was continues after the break. Welcome back to That Was the Woke That Was.
So on to Conor. Liz Truss has said she's fed up with being compared to a lettuce. Is it true or is it false? Now, Conor, I really like you. You're an old friend of mine, but it's not gone well, has it? Let's be honest.
For the lettuce?
But you can answer it. Conor, feel free to answer that question whatever way you want.
If I'm worried about being ambushed by cake, I think Liz has got a lot more to worry about in terms of how she's going to be.
Was she as bad as she was made out to be?
Oh, no, she was worse. And I worry about this, genuine, sort of slightly serious point. I worry a little bit. So I've believed roughly the same things all my political life.
Yeah.
The principles that I hold, small state, personal responsibility, Britain's role in the world, all those things. And like many others of my generation, I was inspired to come into politics by the actions of Margaret Thatcher that transformed this country. And those beliefs that I've held to, even when Liz Truss was an active Liberal Democrat, are now under threat. They're under threat by the bigger state and higher taxes and an assumption actually now that the state should be the provider of first resort, not last. And my concern is that every time Ms. Truss now opens her mouth, she is a drag anchor in the public realm for those ideas and those beliefs that I still believe are the future of this country.
Agreed.
It's Liz Truss. She said, I love you too. But on a serious note, I suppose people often talk about rail privatisation being something that besmirched the whole concept of privatisation. Is she the rail privatisation of the Conservative right?
Yes, without a shadow of a doubt.
The funny thing about that is that the left is so good at recovering their wounded. Yeah. Neil Kinnock was a complete write-off, multiple-time electoral failure, and then the left would they packed together, never let him go, and even to the point where the Kinnock family were making a mozza off the European Commission and so forth, and is now seen as an elder statesman. We let the left traduce the memory of Margaret Thatcher's legacy and achievement. We basically leave our wounded on the battlefield, and it's a problem between left and right. The issue, I see the point slightly differently to Conor, but I accept the point that at its heart, those who oppose the free market, small state values Conor was talking about, seek to exploit the fact that there was an administration that tried to deliver everything at once, in a rush, badly, and then, frankly, in a panic, and therefore say, because of that, we are writing all of these things off for a generation. Can't be tried again. Well, the far left will never admit that something's real communism. No. The far left will never say that anything is the real thing. They've got a utopia idea. So I refuse to let that happen.
Well, one thing I will say, and I completely agree with you, Alex, there, is unfortunately the right has a problem of picking who to kind of help wounded and who to kind of leave on the battlefield. Too many people around Liz Truss keep thinking that a comeback is possible for her. There's too many people kind of encouraging her.
Don't we end up, Pete? Don't we end up sometimes, and I say this as a Thatcherite, we end up sort of inheriting people. There's no real evidence that Liz Truss was particularly right-wing. Sure. And then you get somebody, and I don't want to, single one person out, but sort of Lawrence Fox appears on Question Time, says something that his lefty mates don't like, and then suddenly we have to welcome him as some sort of saviour.
Yeah, but he said a lot of other stuff that none of us want to be associated with.
Exactly
I'll give you another example. Dominic Raab was the Deputy Prime Minister, right? And when the allegations against him boiled down in the end to reality after an investigation, the first was that he'd said someone's work wasn't good enough. And the second one was that he'd intervened with our then ambassador in Spain, who was trying to give away powers in Gibraltar he thought was wrong. As Foreign Secretary, he was completely right. That was his job. And he was hounded out of office, basically, by the civil service.
But does Raab...
Right? And we did nothing we left him on the battlefield.
But does the Raab case, just very quickly, because I know you're close to Dominic, and I imagine Conor's a supporter of his too, but is this now a situation in which the trade unions in the civil service have a veto over government ministers? Because that's what it feels like to me.
Not a veto, but it has a chilling effect. Yeah. For every minister that gets a formal investigation into the fact they said a civil servant's work wasn't up to it, there's 20 other ministers who think, this isn't quite right, but do you know what? I won't raise it because I don't want to run into trouble. Yeah. I'd rather avoid the issue. And you multiply that across government, and it means people are willing to put up with substandard work.
And listen, just to bring this back to your question at the start, I look at what Ms. Truss did when she held the equalities brief on the gender issue stuff, and I look at what Kemi Badenoch has done. And I look at one who made gestures, sloganised it, but actually made no fundamental changes. And I look at an effective Secretary of State who is running her department and across her brief. So my other issue with Liz Truss is that she put some people on the battlefield wounded herself by her behaviour. And I just worry now about...
How is Kwasi?
The messenger matters sometimes in politics. And
I agree, Kemi Badenoch's a very good messenger.
And the total absence of any contrition for all those mistakes. Miss Truss behaved as though she had just won a Thatcherist landslide and screwed it up. And there hasn't been a scintilla of apology.
Just very quickly, I happen to completely agree with you on that, and it was one of my major criticisms of her being in the final two. When the MPs boiled it down, I was like, well, what has she actually achieved? She's held many political offices, which was touted as what a great achievement, but I was like, I can't put my finger on something she's actually done. As a Conservative Party member, I was infuriated because I was like, well, what has any of them been able to do? And I look at that in terms of why the Conservatives are struggling at the next general election, because they haven't really done anything. It's really difficult to say that was that and that's that. And I think Liz Truss was a prime example.
Well, I would say education reform, which was pretty radical and has transformed the opportunities for young people across England, was a major achievement. So there are things we've...
I will say to all of you, and I just throw this out for thought, I think one of the major problems the Conservatives have got is the failure to repeal a lot of the Blair constitutional reform, which has made conservatism basically impossible, whether you vote for it or not. Anyway, Conor, are you... do you believe that Liz Truss is upset being compared to the lettuce? Is it true or is it false?
I think it's true. I think she regrets that the lettuce won.
And the lettuce did win. It's absolutely true. OK, so to Alex, Lancaster University has voted to go 100% vegan by 2027 to save the planet.
That must be false, because you turn off so many students. Even though I have no faith in modern academia, I'm just going to say on pragmatic desire to bring in money basis, that must be false.
Lancaster University, though, is an interesting place. It's like the sort of Warwicks of this world, where it's incredibly popular with the sort of local catchment area, rather than you going all the way from Essex to Cambridge. Probably not that far.
People apply all over the country to Warwick, and indeed I applied to Lancaster and got an offer. So I happened not to go there, but
the point is, it's not absolutely full with loony lefties, so a lot of people.
You would need to have a student population that wanted to be there. I therefore believe, my logic dictates, even though I'm tempted to say it's true, I'm going to say it's false.
OK, well, I'm going to tell you this. You're going to be shocked, because it's absolutely true. OK, so on to Pete.
Yes.
4 in 10 people say they would leave their company if they were asked to wear pronoun badges.
Again, is this one of these only 4 in 10? Because I count
what the other 6?
No, because I count myself as one of these 4 in 10 people. I am absolutely sick of this stuff being rammed down my throat at a corporate level.
Pete,
it is.
I've got to be honest with you. I would love it if you had to wear a little name badge. And also, can I tell you,
Go somewhere else for that.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
yeah, no, I don't want him to wear anything else at all. No, not at all.
But
Our
actually,
brains went to a different place
it
there.
often strikes me that sort of livery on uniforms is like both military officers at McDonald's have the same thing because the number of stars denotes your level, doesn't it?
It is interesting because
it could
obviously
be a 5-star general, 5-star McDonald's.
I think this comes in the wake of Kemi Bendit again giving a speech to businesses saying like, just leave the woke stuff alone, leave politics out of it, and just stick to running businesses. Because I'm not being funny, I'm sick to death of getting an ethics lecture from Ben and Jerry's ice cream on immigration policy. If I'm being honest, it is absolutely exhausting.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't really buy Ben and Jerry's, but I have to admit I don't really buy it anymore. If I do, I don't buy it anymore because I just don't really want my ice cream giving me a lecture. And I think a lot of people are being turned off by it.
Sorry. What do you drink in the evening that leads you to believe your ice cream? It's giving me a lecture.
No. This is on Twitter. They're often criticising random policy and all the rest of it.
But let me ask you this, Alex, about these pronouns. We've had people in this studio, sensible people, who believe that this is some sort of a conspiracy to damage Western society. Potentially, we've even had one member of the House of Lords suggest that it's foreign intelligence services behind all this wokery.
It's not. It's people whose job it has become, whose income relies upon finding the next cutting edge of woke that excludes most people, and then we all have to earn our way in by showing we're compliant. And they make a living from doing that. So if the issue goes away, or on the other hand, if it becomes mainstream, they've got to find the next issue. Yeah. And that's where I think this has been. I would say this about the pronouns business. If someone who's obviously a chap asks me to call him Susan, I will because I'm polite. But I don't think I should be in any way compelled to do so by my employer or anyone else. And most of all, nobody has the right to compel me to think that he is Susan. It's Susan.
It's Susan. Do you know what the best thing is? He did the punchline for me. Get out of it. Not a real phone.
No,
but look, obviously you're not here to speak on behalf of your company, so we won't name the company you work for. But it is an American firm. They're all into this diversity, equality and inclusion, aren't they?
I think we are beyond the peak point on these issues, not least because I think people realise that diversity of opinion is at least as important as all the other kinds of diversity, and that people are entitled to their opinion within their workplace, not just my firm, wherever you work, and that you've got no right to compel people to behave differently. The other thing I think is relevant about that sort of what you've termed an obsession, the way that businesses are keen on these things, is that in the end, the more time you spend talking about this stuff, the less time you're doing the actual job, that thing you're supposed to be doing and delivering on. People say, well, it's important our clients see that we care about this, that, or the other. But there's a good chance that many in your client base don't hold the views you're talking about. So actually, the less you talk about some of this stuff, I think, the better, as long as your workforce is happy.
But Pete, do you feel compelled to get in on all of this? Because one of the things that I find extraordinary is when you try and ask who is behind it, you just go round in circles. And what's happened is, effectively, it feels like a very small number of people are telling the majority how to behave.
I think that's very true, and I think it's important to pick up on what Alex said, that this is people's jobs. There is a lot of money sloshing around in this DEI stuff now. But one thing I would say is a lot of people who do believe in this stuff, I don't think they really care about things like Black Lives Matter or LGBT representation. This is about their own ego and to be seen to be caring about this stuff. That's my main concern, is it's not actually about them caring about these issues.
Well, hang on, let me put this to Conor, because I mean, admittedly, Bournemouth is not exactly the Wild West, but you see in major cities, people who officially support Black Lives Matter doing zero about the knife crime epidemic, which is causing the deaths, tragic premature deaths of a large number of principally young black men.
Absolutely, and you see a lot of people who sort of jump on the diversity bandwagon. You see the most extraordinary solidarity links. So, Gays for Gaza would be an extremely good
Queers
one.
for Palestine.
And how many of
go
these
and
folks...
try it, see how you get on.
So they want to talk, let's give them some pronoun badges. Let's organise Gaza Pride, right? Yeah. And let's give them some badges that say was and were, because that is what would happen under Hamas.
Well, Douglas...
And how that in any way links to, small L, liberal,
Douglas Murray said that, and it was maybe a crass and insensitive comment, but he said, the one advantage with Gaza now, there are no tall buildings to throw me off. And the reality is, when you're talking about Queers for Palestine, that is what they would do with them. And yet suddenly the idea seems to be anyone who's against the West, anyone who's against Britain, anyone who's against America, we all just club together.
Yeah, and we saw this with the UN yesterday, where the British representative stood in a moment's silence for the death of the president of Iran.
I was astonished.
The butcher.
I had hoped that
appalling.
minute's silence was for his victims.
Yes.
And then when it was explained to me and I saw in the footage that it was not, I was absolutely aghast.
Well, one thing about the UN, just very quickly, I mean, we've debated before on this show about the nature of the UN. Churchill and others, I know there was the League of Nations before, but let's ignore that for a second. This idea of bringing countries together in the spirit of dialogue, it has turned into the majority of countries in the world which have worse levels of democracy and governance than Britain are now dictating to the free countries what to do. I mean, we've had examples of, I think, the Iranians on women's rights committees.
Yeah. And some of the worst regimes in the worst on the human rights committee, and indeed chairing it. The United Nations has lost its way, and it's lost its way when you see things like that and formal expressions of condolence passed to someone who was one of the most brutal, who's one of the sharpest end of a brutal regime, systematically repressing its minorities and women. And I think when you see that sort of thing, you realise they are celebrating exactly that which they were meant to oppose.
Absolutely. OK, so, Pete, have 4 out of 10. I mean, we've departed quite a lot from
we
the
moved
topic,
away there.
but it's a tour de force, this show. OK, so, first of all, is the UN good or bad, true or false?
Well, it's bad, so...
True, it's bad. OK, but I'll ask you the actual question. Have 4 out of 10 people said they'd leave their company if they had to have the pronouns on the badge?
I think it's true.
It's absolutely true.
That was The Woke That Was continues after the break. Welcome back to That Was The Woke That Was.
So to Conor, Jeremy Corbyn has been honoured with the prestigious Freedom of the City of Gaza by Hamas. Is it true or is it false? Come on, Conor, let rip. I'm looking at your little face. You're definitely...
It is false, but it's entirely plausible. That's the depressing thing. Look, Jeremy Corbyn is sort of irrelevant now. He's not a Labour MP anymore, but there has not been an enemy of this country that Jeremy Corbyn has not wished to align to, ally with, celebrate, invite. And the thing that is worth remembering, it's losing its resonance, but it is important to remember, is so many people who now aspire to run our country, not all that long ago, actively campaigned to make Jeremy Corbyn the Prime Minister of this country. So what now has retreated back, it's gone full circle to Jeremy Corbyn sitting up on the far right at the back with a little coterie of fellow
extremists,
idiosyncratic, mildly
well, you can say loonies.
Right,
well, I'm heavily ploughing in that direction.
And then what the press release will come out afterwards saying, I didn't actually say it.
I did not actually.
I was ambushed with a loony.
But this little coterie of slightly idiosyncratic, odd people who are an adornment to Parliament, you know, George Galloway's back as well. These people are dangerous. What they represent is profoundly dangerous. They are enemies of everything the free society
Can I ask
Oh,
Conor something about that? Because I agree with everything that you've said, but except the part where you say he's irrelevant, because I worry you've already put 2 and 2 together with the Galloway bit. There is support in this country for Corbyn, and there is some support. I mean, I don't share those values for a moment, but the Labour Party became our first mass political movement for a generation when he became leader, and lots of people joined. George Galloway has demonstrated some electoral success.
Yes.
If Corbyn, I don't know if this has been speculated about on your channel before, if Corbyn stands under the Workers' Party banner with Galloway, I imagine he will pose a real threat to Labour in keeping that seat.
Yes.
At which point I don't accept that he's irrelevant. I will accept I don't want him to win. I'll accept that I disagree with everything they stand for. But clearly not politically irrelevant.
But let me ask you this question, because there was a big debate about one of these, what I would call hate marches, what you might call a Hamas march, what you might call a Free Gaza march. And somebody walks through with a skull cap, and the police stop him and say, you're openly Jewish. Now, you can give me your opinion on this, but I personally felt that the castigation of the police officer was foolish. What the police officer was making the point, if you are openly Jewish amongst this lot, you will be ripped to pieces. Why not ban that march?
First of all, I agree with your conclusion. ultimately you cannot render those marches safe enough that they should be permitted to proceed. I believe in free speech. I don't believe in blocking up the streets every week, a separate point. But if you need to be able to demonstrate that your protest is sufficiently safe for everyone in society, that it should be allowed to go ahead. And they've singularly failed to honour that. But specifically, the officer who expressed himself on that day spoke indelicately but accurately about that situation. Because what he was pointing out was that a march that claims to be anti-Zionist was in fact anti-Semitic.
Yes.
And the person concerned, because he was openly Jewish, was genuinely in danger if he tried to cross. That was true. The officer was right. And for those reasons, you shouldn't allow these marches to go ahead any longer.
I mean, how concerned should the British Jewish community be? Well, how concerned should we be about the British Jewish community when you have people like Corbyn?
So the seat that I'm running for, Finchley and Golders Green, has the largest Jewish population in the UK. But that's dwarfed by other minority populations in other seats that Labour is pandering to in not being stronger on this issue, in my view. And clearly people want to win seats at the forthcoming general election, and they're bearing in mind their prospects in seats across the Midlands and beyond about the Gaza issue, which cost Labour dearly in the local council elections. Labour would have picked up many more council seats were it not for Starmer's equivocation or not going far enough on Gaza as far as they were concerned. And that's what they're angling for.
Jeremy Corbyn, freedom of the city of Gaza, true or false?
It is false.
It is absolutely and unbelievably false. OK, so to Alex. Oh, here we go. The Dean of Trinity College, Cambridge, says the UK owes the Caribbean $200 billion in reparations. Now, Alex, which college did you go to at Cambridge?
Trinity College.
You went to Trinity College, Cambridge. So, Alex, I like to think of you as being partly responsible for this.
Yeah, so the only thing I don't know about here is whether you're tripping me up on the number. Right? The number might be bigger or smaller. The direction of travel is true. And so let me give you a couple of things about this. The first is, of course, so my college writes to its alumni network, and it says, we are instituting a research project into how wrong our past donors were, in connections with slavery, money from the wrong places, guilt that we're going to find through this archaeology process, and then we're going to come back to you with the findings. Don't worry, it's only going to cost £4 or £5 million. Next part of the letter is, would you like to become a donor to Trinity College, Cambridge? And you're like, well, no, because I've just seen how you treat past donors, and if this is how you behave towards past donors, why would I become a current one? I wrote to them along those lines, and I got the worst possible response, which is no reply.
Yes.
Right? But then they have this portrait of Balfour, which gets slashed up. At the time of recording this, like 2 months ago, Action, first of all, they just poo-pooed it and said, well, it's a bit regrettable. Sort of anonymous spokesman. Huge outcry, quite rightly, from the country. Irreplaceable art being destroyed. And finally, the Master comments and says how wrong this is. We're going to take action. Well, that action ain't fast in coming. 2 months on, nothing has happened. And now the Master releases a book about racism and slavery, because that's where the real issue is. The real desire from leaders in this kind of position in academia is identifying quite how bigoted we were in the past and the extent of the bigotry they need to work out, and then tell us how guilty we today, all of us who've had nothing to do with it, how we should feel about it.
But also remember, when you are talking about slavery and filming yourself pulling down statues or damaging paintings, you're doing it on a phone made by a 9-year-old.
Yes, but my college has this peculiar importance in it because it's the only real, as the Americans would see, endowment in the UK. It's the only really wealthy college. So if you look at that institution, which has propped up all the other colleges in Cambridge and made much more widespread philanthropic support for other places, and now it thinks its job is to get behind wokery, that's a really important institutional capture, which we should all lament. And the other thing about it is, when the protests move on from King's College to Trinity, my fear is that when they occupy Great Court, they will, rather than being turfed out from private property, be welcomed with open arms and be welcome to occupy it for as long as they like.
Conor, why have all these institutions been captured?
That's an impossible question. I think lack of vigilance from the right. We have always, one of the great failings of the right is respecting the well-intentions of others. And we've imported some of this from America. By the way, in America, in many places, they're pushing back very strongly. And in America, of course, they have the conservative colleges as well as the liberal colleges. There is that tension which we don't have. And it's feeding through into the electoral prospects as well. It's a very, very
The Americans
concerning...
have more respect for history, bizarrely, than we do. We've got a lot more of it, and maybe that's why they respect it more than us. But this desire to traduce everything in your own history and past and say that now is forever the glorious year zero, and all that we need to do is look backwards to work out quite how wrong and bigoted you were, is that it is inviting the next generation to think exactly the same of you.
Correct. Yeah, exactly.
That is precisely the reverse of
Well,
what
I've
you do
made-
in teaching and lead and building on the shoulders of giants.
I've made the point before today that one would assume, if the current direction of travel continues, the Nelson Mandela statue will be pulled down in Parliament Square on the grounds that he wasn't a vegan, that he drove a car and was interested in trophy hunting. By the same standard that we are pulling down statues now. But I just worry, Pete.
But we've also, have we not? So our politicians are responsible for this. Churchill, I was at a thing last night where they unveiled a statue or a bust of Churchill at Russie. Look, Churchill had views of his time on many things, and gender and race and so on. Does that diminish Churchill's achievements, or was Churchill an achiever within the context of his time? It's this sort of retrospective arrogance that we have.
But Conor, here is the
we are so
the arrogance of it.
The stupidity of this is the reason that the human race is so successful is our ability to pass knowledge from father to son and mother to daughter. That means inevitably that people in the past will be less knowledgeable and more backward. That's the definition of them being in the past in human society.
It's a wonder they don't cancel Jesus. I mean, because he owed 12 blokes, right? I mean, how outrageous.
The lack of
the
diversity.
women weren't there.
The lack of diversity.
This is Jesus.
It's Jesus. He said, make sure you keep watching talkTV because Ken in London's bound to be on the phone at some point.
Look, the thing I would say, though, is when it comes to this reparations business, is I would take it significantly more serious if they came to me with a plan on how they want to spend the money and who they're going to give the money to, which organisation gets it and how much. I would have more respect for that.
But
also,
hang on,
just
but Pete,
there will be. One day
then
they
there's
will.
also,
They don't invite it.
I cannot help but notice.
Let's not encourage them, Pete.
No. What I
Pete.
can't help, okay, I hate giving people ideas on the show, but what I can't help but notice is that these people always seem to be around when it's a handout time. Where are they? And I make this point pretty much every single show. Where are they on the issue of kids dying, getting stabbed on the streets? Where are they when these actual issues are happening? It's very different. It's very much harder to suddenly turn up for these.
This week, there's a woman who's made a career from discussing racial guilt in the United States, who had it revealed to her from one of these hereditary researching organisations that she was descended from one of the people that came over on the Mayflower, the original abusing colonisers. And she just laughed it off. She thought, oh, that's funny. Her entire basis for all of her life's arguments. Anyway, back to why you should all feel wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so has literally your old college decided that I owe 200 billion to the Caribbean? Is it true or is it false?
I think, so as long as I'm going to assume you're not trying to trip me up on the number, I'm going to say true, because the direction of travel is true.
I'm also going to say, just to remind you that Alex is not a donor to Trinity College, Cambridge. It's absolutely true.
That was The Woke That Was continues after the break. Welcome back to That Was The Woke That Was.
Pete, Kwasi Kwarteng has criticised Liz Truss for making up deep state conspiracy theories to sell her book. Now, Kwasi Kwarteng is the only other Kwasi other than Modo that I'm aware of.
It's true. That's very true. And I actually think this is true. And I think he is right. And I make this point pretty much to anybody who is a Liz Truss supporter, if there are still any out there. You have to stop giving this woman a platform, because I completely agree with what's been saying, that every time this woman opens her mouth, she is she's a magnet. I bet this is Liz Truss.
It's Liz Truss saying, if you make another joke about the lettuce, I'm going to hit you with it.
No, but
Liz, it's gone limp.
But let's be honest, she did a tour out in America trying to sell her book, and she keeps popping up here, there, and everywhere. And some people think that she's the saviour of conservatism. If she's the saviour of conservatism, we're all in trouble.
Well, hang on. We are going to burn out our politicians if we carry on using them up, no matter what their successes or failures are, and saying, right, that's you out of public life by your 40s and 50s. And indeed, in many countries, you're just getting started. In Germany, you're just in the foothills of your career. In Japan, you're still a novice by the time we're slinging out prime ministers. And if you read that down the line...
but the end result of that is you get Joe Biden, who lost his front door.
I know.
I mean, that's extraordinary.
But
he fell up the stairs once.
My point is that we should allow people who have objectively failed sometimes room to recover, rehabilitate. I appreciate your point is she's denying herself that room.
Yes,
but my point is we should always be willing to allow people to evolve to the state of being elder statesmen. After all, William Hague was once a figure of fun in British politics. He is no longer.
I preferred him when he was anti-European. I'll be honest, I liked his early work.
And not saying that Tony Blair's one of his mates now. but the point is that he was a figure of mockery in public life, and he's been allowed the time and space to grow into someone who's a very significant contributor to public life. I hope one day Liz Truss will be too.
I'll tell you something though, Conor. Let me just say this to Conor. We've met up with Kwasi Kwarteng, or I've seen him. It's fair to say that he has repaid Liz Truss's level of loyalty, hasn't he?
Let me sort of try and build some consensus here, although I wonder if Alex has actually booked Liz Truss to do his annual dinner in Finchley or something. All those, the Hague example, and I think also, by the way, do you remember Estelle Morris?
Yes.
Who was Education Secretary, who
basically stood down on the
very
ground she wasn't good
courageously
enough.
said, I don't think I'm up to this. And actually, she was quite good. And she stepped back, and she's now in the House of Lords. Ms Truss has expressed no regret at the ham-fisted way in which she did what she did. She's come up with some frankly barking ideas that this was some deep state conspiracy that destroyed her when it was basic incompetence, lack of planning, failure to roll the pitch. And I think she treated Kwasi appallingly. The idea that it was Kwasi who gave her the weak pound and not her budget that she had dreamed up in opposition was for the birds. And ironically, the moment she sacked him, threw him out in his ear when he was in DC and had to come home early, was the moment she signed her own death warrant.
Do you think that level of disloyalty was the death warrant?
No. Yes. I think the lack of planning, and I said earlier, she behaved as though she'd won this sort of landslide, thunderous majority, this mandate from the people. She'd won a vote of members. She was behind overall with the MPs. There was a collective, I think, sense of guilt actually in the party for what they'd done to Boris. They realised they'd made a mistake, and they worried about Rishi within that, and they gave her the leadership, and she was singularly ill-equipped. We should have gone back and we should have all sat down and watched the pork and apples and cheese speech.
She's opening up new pork markets.
We should have taken a deep breath.
But before you two come in, look, I lament the loss of Boris Johnson. You were incredibly close to him. I don't know the precise details, but you were part of his campaign to become Prime Minister. Presumably you remain close to him now. Could we have him back? Because I have to say, he felt like, look, I would say what I think a lot of people from the north of England would say about Boris Johnson. You always got the sense he was on your side, and he was somebody who, in a sea of very poor politicians, was somebody who felt like a leader.
So look, he's not in the House of Commons. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, will lead the Conservative Party into the election. My own view is that messing around with that and changing leaders and swapping back or another person would be insanity at this point. We need to stick together and present the case to the country and do our very best in that election.
I wanted to answer your question about whether it was the Truss-Kwarteng relationship that led to her end. And I certainly don't think defenestrating her own Chancellor helped, but I disagree that was the thing that brought down the Truss premiership. I think the issue, and it wasn't the economics either, it was that having won a bitterly fought contest in which 2/3 of her colleagues didn't support her, she went on to only appoint her ministry from the third that did. And when you're in a role that requires you to bring people with you and unite your party around you, if you so singularly fail to do that, then in the first real bump you hit, they're all going to be willing to throw you over.
Yes.
And so it was.
Absolutely.
Well, one thing I will just pick up on, though, is I completely agree with that. I think Liz Truss also had the kind of, towards the end of the Theresa May years, that kind of bunker mentality that she thought everybody was out to get her. I think
Well, they were mostly.
Most of the time, that's very true. But the one thing,
sometimes, Pete, without being funny, people in the bunker people are out to get her.
That's true.
It has been known to happen.
But the one thing I will pick up on is when we mentioned Estelle Morris and William Hague, those two people had great levels of self-awareness.
Liz has none.
Liz has absolutely none. And that is what really turned me off from her when she put her name forward to be leader. I was like, that woman doesn't have the self-awareness to be the leader and to be Prime Minister.
Okay, so let me ask you, has Kwasi Kwarteng criticised Liz Truss on the basis that she's peddling conspiracy theories? Is it true or is it false?
It's true.
It's absolutely true. And now we come to the end of the quiz. It's been a hard-fought battle. But anyway, I'm going to give out the scores. So Pete Barnes is on 1.3 million points. Alex Deane is on 4 points because he went to Trinity College, Cambridge. But the winner by a landslide with 5.8 million points is Conor Burns, who has got it because he's our first night to appear on the show. Thank you so much to Alex Deane. Thank you so much to Sir Conor Burns. Thank you so much to Pete Barnes. Until next time, goodbye.